Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the next episode of the Real Wealth Solutions podcast. Today, our guests are the co-creators of Invictus Capital, Anthony Vicino and Dan Krueger, hailing from Minnesota. Gentlemen, thank you guys so much for joining us alongside with my co-host, Greg Scully. Welcome you. We just like starting off, if you would tell us, I guess, individually a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are as an investor, what led you to there, why multifamily, kind of bring us up to date to where we are now, and then we'll roll with some other questions if you don't mind.
Sounds good. Anthony, should we rock, paper, scissors? Who goes first?
Nah, I think you got this. You have a pretty good story. I think so. You lead off because, always lead with your best, right?
All right, I'll get us rolling. So Anthony and I both started in this business separately. We joined forces effectively in 2019 after meeting at an event here locally in Minnesota. And currently we've got about 100 doors under management. We're a vertically integrated company focusing on the Minneapolis-St. Paul market. I started back in 2018 when I was coming out of the corporate finance world, knowing that I wanted to focus more on entrepreneurial ventures. And as soon as I started doing a deep dive on real estate, it was just a no-brainer. There's just such a fantastically simple and scalable business model that as soon as I started researching, I got hooked. So I got my first property January of 2018, and it's been pretty much a buy, fix up, refi, and reinvest in the next property business plan ever since. Just kind of rinsing and repeating the same thing over and over again. And I was doing that until Anthony and I crossed paths, like I said, end of 2019. And when we just started doing the same thing together, only bigger and better. I'll let Anthony give some insight into his background and tell you guys what we're working on today and moving forward.
Yeah, so I didn't come from the corporate background. I like to tell people that I'm a really bad employee. And I figured that out really early in life, is that working for other people wasn't really a good use of my skills or my mindset. So I figured out pretty early that I was going to have to do something for myself if I was going to make anything in the world. So I went into the business route, started a bunch of businesses along the way, some high-rise window washing companies, a manufacturing company. I write science fiction and fantasy books. And through all of that, it kind of led me to this place where I landed in Minneapolis here a couple of years ago. And the story that I tell is driving into Minneapolis one night, looked up at the skyline and looked at the skyscrapers and thought, how do you buy one of those things? It was a really weird, random question. Like, I don't really have any ambition to buy a skyscraper per se, but just like trying to solve that question led me down the rabbit hole of learning about real estate and diving into that. And pretty soon I figured out that I really like it. I really like what real estate offers in terms of time freedom, being able to generate money. That's a great thing. Everybody loves that, being able to take control of your life. And you do that in this way that's really simple. So we talk about how multifamily investing in particular is this really simple thing. Once you understand how the pieces go together, you can build anything with it. And so that's what we started doing back in 2017, 2018. I bought a triplex, started small, wanted to learn the ropes and prove out the systems for myself before scaling larger. And then Dan and I joined forces. We started syndicating apartments. We took down our first syndication at the end of 2019. And then we just closed on our second one here a couple of weeks ago. And that kind of brings us up to present day.
Cool. Right on. And this is our first time with 4 people on the podcast. I know. We'll just call it right now. We're going to be jumping on each other's.
Yeah, we work it out somehow. I want to go back to Dan real quick on your first property, January of 2018. Was it a single family, duplex, triplex, bigger?
No, when I started, I specifically wanted to be in what would qualify as commercial properties. And I don't mean commercial in the sense of like retail, industrial. What I mean is I'm talking specifically about the debt. So in multifamily, when you have a property that's got 5 units or more, you're getting a commercial loan, and the valuations are also going to be driven primarily by the NOI as opposed to comps. So I knew that those two distinctions right off the bat made anything over 5 units for me more desirable than less than 5. So I started with a 6 unit, then I did an 8 to 15, 5, 32, and so on and so forth after that. So
you just kept refining out, leveling up to the next property.
Yep.
Yeah.
And those are all still the portfolio today?
Well, yeah, no, I sold my first one actually. That's the only thing I've sold to date. We've done refis on a few of the properties, so we've been through a few capital events. We've got one deal, the one that I've sold already, and Anthony sold one as well. They've gone full cycle, but so far our philosophy with investing is more of a buy and hold one. As long as assets are performing well, there's not a bunch of big capex stuff coming up. We would prefer to sell as little as possible. You know, obviously that shifts a little bit when you're doing a syndication, but for the most part, we like to try to hold things as much as possible. And if we want to try to pull some capital out or realize some gains, we'll try to do that through a refi as opposed to a sale.
Yeah, that's a great point about the 5+ units. Once you jump into that commercial space, the lending, it's a little bit different. I wouldn't say it's any more difficult than the residential. It is just different. Well, I think it's easier too, you know,
I just bought myself a condo, and that was infinitely harder than any of the deals I've ever done. As far as like getting the debt, you know, really, if the property is, when you're doing commercial debt, if the property produces enough cash to pay for the debt, you're fine. And the bank will like to see, depending on who you're working with, you know, some liquidity and some net worth from the operator. But for the most part, it's does the business pay for the debt on a commercial loan? Whereas on a residential, if you're going to go buy a house for yourself, even if it's for an investment, the bank's going to say, okay, does your paycheck cover this debt? So that's really one of the big factors that drew me in, was the more mechanical nature of the lending, I guess is how I'd put it.
Yeah, and then you're not tied to comps. I mean, you have more control over what your property is worth rather than what your neighbor sold his for.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that was actually the reason, like when I started, I went into the triplex, you know, starting small. And if I could go back, I would have started just a couple units larger, you know, start with a 5 unit, because again, like Dan's pointing out, the debt isn't much harder to get. And in fact, I think in a lot of cases, it's just easier because they're not underwriting you as much as they're underwriting the property itself. But with that triplex, for me, it was really interesting because I only owned it for a year and a half before I finally sold it. But within 9 months, I refinanced it, and it appraised for $125,000 more than what I purchased it for, which was through no fault of my own or credit to myself. Like, I didn't go in there and improve the property. I put less than $5,000 into it. And so that was born entirely off the back of what the other houses in the area were selling for at that time. So like, that just drove home to me, like, that lack of control. Like, I didn't do anything to deserve that appreciation, and it could have just as easily have cut the other way. And so that was like the real light bulb moment for me, where I was like, oh, okay, I really need to get out of the smaller stuff and just start playing in that larger multifamily space where the loans are just, and the valuations are done so differently.
Although residential debt, man, you know, sub 3% for 30 years at a fixed payment.
I was going to say that is kind of
pretty good.
For people
pretty
that
good.
For people that are newer, that can be the lowest hanging fruit, specifically because you do get good terms. And if it's going to be something like a house hack situation where maybe you're buying a duplex and you're going to live there, you can get in for, you know, 3.5% down if you're doing some of these FHA loans. So that, you know, I'll put an asterisk next to my commercial debt is always better, and say that, hey, if you can actually get into like an FHA and it's your first deal and you want to have kind of a lower risk point of entry, that might make a lot more sense than jumping into a commercial property where you're going to have to put at least 20% down, if not 25. But it aligned with my personality. That's
a really good point. And I'll retract my previous statement, because I did do an FHA and I put less than $7,000 into that thing, and then eventually sold it a year and a half later for like $70,000 more than what I purchased it for. So the FHA can be a really good route if you're not sitting on a ton of capital just ready to deploy, because 20% is kind of a lot for, you know, if you're just getting started in real estate, depending on where you're at.
Yeah. The triplex, see, I never bought a triplex, but I always had in my mind that at least the level of a triplex, if you go a unit down, there's a lot of variables involved here, but it would still be a self-supporting building in most cases with one unit down. Whereas with a single family, you're 100% vacant. A duplex, you're not going to make your expenses. But it seemed like that triplex was the smallest potential business plan to have a self-supporting property. with.
Yeah, the issue with the triplexes up here and the Twin Cities specifically is there are a lot of, they weren't built custom to be a triplex. They were kind of like jimmy rigged out of a mansion.
Yep.
And so they tend to be a little bit more Frankenstein together. And like the property I purchased, it was exactly like that. It was kind of a nightmare in terms of how it was put together. But, you know, to your point, it could perform with, you know, one of those units vacant, which was a great relief, because at no point then do I have to really worry like that I'm going to suddenly drop below what what the property can generate on its own, and I won't have to come out of pocket on it. So that's a nice cushion to have.
Yeah. And for the house hack, we're going to talk about triplexes for an hour now. For the house hack, you could, that's same thing with one unit down. If you're house hacking and you're rehabbing that one unit, you can use that as a business plan, a house hack that is at least breaking even until you turn them all, and then you just leave the place and whatever. But Darren, you were going to jump in. Did you have anything?
I'll let that train of thought go because you guys.
Okay. Yeah. Let's fast forward. So we're in kind of similar positions in some ways. We in Johnson City here, we've got 100+ units, but we're using third-party management. So I thought what we might do is talk about third-party management and being fully integrated. Both have advantages, both have disadvantages. I think, Dan, you mentioned out of the gate you were using third-party management. How did that go? And was there like a line in the sand moment that you said, okay, I'm bringing this in-house, and what led you to that decision?
Yeah. So when I first started, I was under the impression that, property management was property management. And I kind of missed the fact that a third-party property management company would make sense on certain types of deals and would make less sense on other types of deals. Now, specifically, I'm talking about heavier lift value add types of deals, which the first deal I did definitely was. And most every deal that we have done up until COVID has been something that was a fairly heavy lift where we really need a big consistent presence on site to effectively execute the business plan. And so I was thinking that, okay, it doesn't really matter if it's value add or if it's turnkey. I can just hire this company, and for 7%, I think is what it was, they'll do all the work for me. And I'll just tell them, here's what I want to do. Here's the rents I want to get. Here's the upgrades I'm thinking. And they're just going to do all this work for me. And then it became obvious over the first next couple of months. So I bought it in January. By around May, I was realizing that this wasn't going to be a good fit, because a property management company managing a 6-unit building, charging 7% off of gross rents collected, is not going to be making much money at all. And they're not going to be making nearly enough to have someone on site every day overseeing contractors, leasing units, proactively removing the trouble tenants that were in the building. We needed a full-time person on that project, managing it to have it perform well. And no one was going to do that or care about that as much as me for a 6-unit building. Once you get bigger, you could start to do it, but on a project that small, there was no way it would have worked. Had that been a turnkey deal where I bought something that was stabilized and already running well, and I just needed someone to stop by, once or twice a month to take keep an eye on things and maybe collect some rents and show a unit once every few months, that would have worked. But for a value add deal, this needed a big presence, and no third-party property management company would have been able to do a decent job on a 6-unit for me. So I decided, because I'm a little bit of a control freak myself too, I was just going to do it myself. Because that's a great way to just learn it really well. So that when I do hire someone to help me in the future, I'll know what I'm hiring for better. And then, I kept researching other groups and companies that I liked, and they all seem to have this vertically integrated business model. Ken McElroy is a perfect example of that to the nth degree, with 10,000 plus units. That seemed to be where I wanted to end up. And so I decided to do that early on before it really made financial sense. So we had all those systems in place, and we can kind of dive into the financial sense comment if you want, but I opted to do it early, put in the heavy lifting up front, and do it earlier rather than later. Then that was just a a personal preference.
Yeah, I mean, and that 6 unit, you're right. It's just a math thing. It's just the incentives aren't there for a property manager with,
Yeah, they
that
might have
kind of
made like
return.
100,
Yeah.
$200 a month.
So, to do to project manage on a 6 unit is probably not in most third property managers regular course of business plan.
Mhm.
And if that's something you need, if you're in a large enough market, perhaps there is that one out there that has project management or construction as a separate or something that they do in-house, and they might charge you 15% over whatever labor and materials to do it. But they do exist.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean,
You're
it
going to
makes
run
it.
in.
Yeah, go ahead,
I'm sorry.
man.
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to run into one of two situations, which is either it's the property management group is experienced in dealing with larger properties, and that's where they get their money is there's that scale. So they're dealing with like the 50 to 100 unit properties, and maybe they'll come down and deal with this little 6 unit over here, or they tend to deal with like the single family homes and the duplexes and those really small things. And so 6 units is just a little bit maybe bigger than what they would typically do, or for the other companies, it's on the way small side. So in both of those, you're in this weird gray zone where you're not big enough to make it worth their while, but you're also maybe too big for some of them to, be able to handle effectively.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that, Dan, you recognize, hey, this may not just be, that this company can't do what I want them to do. I see long-term where I want to get to. The Ken McElroy example, for example, that version, you saw the long picture, and that's why you just went ahead and said, even if I have to bust my butt right now for however long this takes, this is what I'm going to do. Because when I get to 100 doors, 200, 300, this is what we want to be doing. And here are the reasons why. And I guess we can get into the financial reasons as why at some point, but that's what sticks out to me is why you made that decision.
Yeah. I mean, Anthony and I talk about this a lot on our podcast. Anytime we talk to anyone, really, investors, potential partners, this comes up a lot, and that's starting with your end state in mind. Starting with that goal of where you want to end up at the end, and making sure that everything you do early on aligns with that long-term goal. Because a lot of times people start doing things, and they'll do what makes sense for today, even though in 5 or 10 years they want to be operating at a different level. So for us, we knew where we were trying to end up, and so we knew that if we're going to have this in-house at some point, it just makes sense to do it now, have the systems in place so that we can scale into them, as opposed to trying to create that after you already need it and you're trying to play catch up, and it just seemed to make sense because we were pretty crystal clear on our vision of where we were going.
Yeah. And to Darren, your point there is like at the beginning, when you first start doing it, it is a pain in the butt, like everything is when you're first learning and implementing it. But I think it's actually probably easier to do from the very beginning rather than waiting until you've acquired hundreds and hundreds of units and then deciding now we're going to bring this in house and try to make that transition. So it's one of those things that I don't have any data to support this or personal experience, but I would assume it's probably much harder to turn the boat once it's already big and heading towards the iceberg, rather than just setting it off on the right course from the beginning. That's avoiding that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that's where we are. We're right at 103 in Johnson City, 52 in Knoxville is managed by someone else. And for that property, since it's in a different location, we won't touch it. It doesn't have to be touched, but we're exactly where you are. And I can see how it would have been, but I also think that however long ago, we didn't know what we didn't know. Now we do know. And I never would have thought we would make the leap, but now we can't wait to make the leap. And it's like we just had a pep talk this morning. I needed a pep talk. Greg gave me a little pep talk about making this jump. And I'm like, I know.
One of the most,
yeah.
I think one of the most important parts about this question of whether to do it in-house, whether to have property management in-house or to use third party, is that there's no wrong answer. Both ways work. I know a ton of guys in both camps where they use third party and they do it in-house, and they all make money. It's just a question of what aligns with the personalities of the operators. Are you the type who wants to control every little detail and you want to kind of micromanage every project and have your fingers in everything? Then, having it in-house might make more sense than someone who is fine being a little bit more hands off and freeing up their time to focus on other things. So it's, you'll make money both ways. It's just what's going to make you happier and align with your personality, I think, is the bottom line.
Yeah, and it's a little bit dictated by the situation too, right? If you're looking to invest in a different city, not locally to you, then you're going to be forced into that managing third party aspect. Or, if you're looking at going straight into like a 250 unit apartment complex, well, if you're brand new and you don't already have property managing experience or a company doing that already, then the bank's probably not going to be super psyched on you just waltzing in and being like, we're going to manage it ourselves. They're going to make you have a third party property management team. So it can be dictated by your scenario too.
Very true.
Yeah. And one advantage of the third party management, and Dan, maybe you benefited from it from those 6 months that you did have it, was you get a peek behind the curtain of how their systems work and stuff. You get an idea of what the reporting looks like, how things flow in and out, as income and expenses. And if you're not strong on that accounting side, you can sure learn a lot. And then also, those systems will be established, assuming you're maybe not systems, but your property will be established in some kind of accounting format, assuming you have a reasonably adept third-party manager when you go to switch.
I didn't, but to your point, I did make that connection around month 3 or so. I realized that this probably wasn't going to be a great fit, and I knew that I was going to end up doing this in-house. So I leveraged that and used the next few months where I still had them, where we were still working together, as basically one big training experience where I was like, okay, I'm going to jump in and start to do this with them, because they're not doing the work that I need done and someone's got to do it. And that'll give me an opportunity to work alongside them, learn as much as I can before I cut them loose and we go separate ways. So they did serve a benefit in that regard. So I'm not disappointed that I used third party at all. It was a great learning experience. I think it would have been a much rougher learning curve on that very first deal if I hadn't had them, at least for a little bit, even though it wasn't a good fit and it wasn't right for that deal. It was still, I think, a necessary stage to go through just for educating myself on how to manage properties.
I'm curious, and you guys might all have an opinion on this, do you think that would be a viable track for a new investor who's like, I want to bring property management in-house, I want to do this myself, but I don't know what I'm doing? And honestly, there's not a ton of great resources out there for how to actively manage your property. There are some out there, but would that be a good route of going in there and saying, I'm going to hire out this third party for a year, 6 months, however long, see how they do it, learn the ropes, get really active with them, and then bring it in-house?
Yeah, but the only downside is a lot of groups will get you into like a 12-month commitment or something. So you're not really going to be able to sign someone up on a month-to-month basis, learn all their secrets, and then can them a couple months in. That would be that'd
be hard. Yeah,
that wouldn't be a good move. But I think it definitely wouldn't be a poor investment if you are doing your first deals and you say you want to use property management, a third-party property management for the first year to learn the ropes with the intention of bringing it in-house in the second year. I think that would be, that'd probably be the only way to do it, unless you've got some other kind of partner that can help educate you. Or
think of it like tuition.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you priced it into your underwriting already for it to be a cash flowing deal at whatever, 7% property management, you're only going to be ahead when you make that transition. So if you haven't somehow given yourself a haircut out of the gate by improperly underwriting it to support itself at the higher property management, then you should be fine. And just one thing, I've heard somebody say, just in contracts in general, add an addendum to it that with 30 days notice, either party can terminate contract.
And one thing I will say,
then you do have that out.
Yeah.
With a very simple, hey, if either one of us aren't happy, 30 days notice, we're both out.
Yeah, and I think most contracts by default will at least have that in there for the manager, so they can,
for the manager.
but they won't have the piece in there where you can cancel in the first 30 days.
Right.
So
Because
it's pretty easy
sometimes
to
you're right. They may say,
pencil
yeah,
it
you
in.
break contract, you still owe us for the year, or you
Yeah.
owe us for the remainder of the contract.
And one thing I will say is as well, just to kind of back the fact that even if you want to do it in-house, it's probably a really good idea to hire a third party for at least a period of time up front. Is there's a lot of legal nuances with property management that people aren't really aware of because they don't matter until something happens. And sometimes you can just have, no issues for a long period of time and think that, oh, this is easy. I just have someone sign a lease and they pay me and then I just send them a non-renewal. There's a lot of little things that you can't do and you can't say and that you have to do and that you have to have on paper, that you just don't know right off the bat unless you go to some MHA classes or spend some time really educating yourself. And that's
And
the
it's
benefit
it's
to having
hyper
third
local too,
parties. And
right?
it's
Like
hyper local
it's
too.
hyper local. The
So-
ordinances in St. Paul, Minneapolis are going to be different than in Minneapolis, just across, or St. Paul, Minnesota, across from Minneapolis here, or it's
Yeah.
going to be different in Johnson City. So you really need to know like what's your local ordinances, the state rules, the federal rules. And honestly, it can be really hard to come by a lot of that information because you don't know what you don't know. So you don't even know what to go out there and Google or what questions to be asking a lot of times.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, another tidbit quote somebody threw out the other day was there's generally two times you look at a contract: when you sign it and when you want to sue somebody.
Yep.
And
that
you could
sounds
be
right.
you could be on the receiving end of that as well. So you're absolutely right about the legal side of it. It is a highly regulated. I don't know, highly. It is a regulated business, and
Yeah, but there's just a
there.
lot of administrative things that a newbie wouldn't think to do that actually really matter if you have to go to court for something, or if you try to evict someone and then find out you did it the wrong way, you didn't provide enough notice, and all of a sudden you get to court and you don't have a leg to stand on. Where if you had a property manager, they'd tell you, oh, you have to fill out, this move-in sheet and this move-out disposition, and if you don't have these things, you can go to court and this person might have done some really illegal stuff. It doesn't matter because you don't have this one thing on paper. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that, you're just not going to know as a newbie. And
And the consequences can be really high.
Yeah.
Not just a matter of like, oh, you can't evict them now, but like, oh, you actually discriminated against this person and now they're countersuing you. Oh, great.
And to your point earlier, Anthony, that's a very jurisdiction centric thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a tenant friendly state, it's probably a much higher bar on the education and compliance side for self-management than if you're in whatever, pick your favorite owner friendly state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you guys,
Interesting.
have you, during this whole self-management process, now you have 100 doors under your belt, who did you lean on? Who have you leaned on, at least to get to a certain point? Has it all been trial and error? Has it all been, oh my gosh, we should have done this, thank goodness they didn't sue us for discrimination? Or how have you arrived at where you feel like we have a good foot on the ground, we feel good about the direction we're going, we treat people fairly, people want to live in our property? How have you gotten to where you are as far as that goes?
Yeah, I mean, I lean on my head property manager right now. So when we say we manage everything in-house, that doesn't mean that Anthony and I are running around to properties collecting rents and fielding maintenance calls. We just have employees on payroll that are our employees that do this for us. So we've got Mike, our lead property manager. He's got, I think, at least 15 years experience of being a property manager in this area. And so he's kind of my go-to guy for any administrative leasing issues, right? That process that I mentioned of, okay, when you move someone in, you got to go through the checklist. They've got to sign this. They've got to fill this out. You've got to have this move out disposition and, all this stuff. He's the one who I lean on for those processes to make sure those are done well. Then we've also got a really good attorney that handles our standard lease and makes sure that is appropriate and helps us update it when things change, like COVID. There's going to be different things called out in the lease now that we've gone through COVID.
Mm-hmm.
One in particular is like force majeure. That's something that I'd never even heard of until COVID. And then when this popped up, we started to realize, okay, there's a little bit of a weakness in our our leases here, if some sort of event like this pops up, we need to have a provision here that says that, yeah, okay, you still do owe us rent even when, you know, this type of stuff happens. So having a good attorney for that piece, to make sure that all our leases and any just weird nuances that pop up that I have a question on, having a really strong real estate attorney that knows your area. And then if you're doing in-house, either go and take all the classes yourself to learn all the laws if you really want to do that, or hire someone that's got that experience. And that's been our strategy, is to hire the talent that can.
Yeah. A guy with 15 years experience, sounds like you were very intentional, and you just gave us a great tidbit of, I don't want to go figure all that stuff out on my own. I don't want to learn it. I want to pay someone to do it, period.
Yep.
And I want to take the financial brunt up front as we continue to create more cash flow in order to get to that point, because it's not worth saving that dime and penny for possibly getting sued.
Yep.
Yeah. So the mix that's worked for us as far as headcount's concerned so far, and what I seem to hear from most other operators out there who have done this, is about one property manager and one maintenance guy per 100 doors. That seems to be the mix that works.
Okay.
Now that's going to differ if you're just if you're buying, you know, brand new Class A stabilized assets versus value add Class C assets.
Right.
That might change it a little bit, but that's, you know, that's where we're at. We got a full-time maintenance guy, we've got a full-time property manager, we've got a part-time property manager that's on call, who we really haven't utilized in a long time. And the next hire more than likely is going to be I guess what we'll call a leasing agent to work under Mike, so he can do more project management, manage things from a higher level. That could be the person kind of running around doing showings and all that stuff, and some of the grunt work. And that's how we see it unfolding over the next couple months here.
Yeah. And I think this is really important when we talk about like in-house management versus third party and kind of weighing the pros and cons. It would be a mistake, I think, to think about in-house management as something that you as the operator, the investor, are going to be doing yourself. Like, do you really want to bring property management in-house so that you can handle the leasing, the evictions, all that, the rigmarole that goes with that? Probably not. If you're doing it just to save a couple of bucks, you're going to be sorely disappointed. What you're really doing when you're bringing property management in-house is ideally hiring great people that can build the systems for you, or that you work together with to build those systems so that they're in a position to succeed. But, you know, if you don't have experience during the property management, then you go and you hire somebody who does have that. You put them into place and say, let's build this thing. How does this work? And so that's where the real difficulty comes, because if you've ever had a business where you've had to hire an employee, you know how hard it is to find good help. Like finding that person that is a rock star and they can build those systems. That's one in a million. And so I don't really have any good advice for how to do that necessarily. All I can say is that when you find that person who is a rock star, do whatever you can to keep them, because they will, you know, fly you to the moon and back.
And that's one of the exposures of the integration maybe at the smaller unit numbers, is that if you have a third party manager and they've got an office and 4 or 5 different leasing agents and they lose one person, you're going to be fine because they have other people to pick up that slack. If you lose Mike, or I can't remember his name already, you know, you're going to feel a much greater impact than if you were still in the bullpen of a third party manager. So there is that exposure to,
Yeah. At that point, it comes back to me at this point, which like I'm still fine with, but that's kind of a risk that's inherent to doing that, is you're taking on a little bit more risk for yourself, in the sense that if Mike gets hit by a bus or just disappears to Mexico and never comes back, I've got to step in and pick up the slack and, you know, go find another employee.
And this is the case. This is the case with all small businesses, right? Like the owner is the stopgap. At the end of the day, if the cashier doesn't show up, well, it looks like you're putting on the smock, you're working the cash register, right? Or, you know, like the stocking needs to get done. You go do the stocking, customer needs help, like you help them. And so that's the owner's role. They fill that. And so, but your goal, I think, is always to get to the point where your redundancy as an individual owner is not necessary, so that you have enough people in place, good systems there, so that if something does happen, there's another person that can step in. And so I think that's the difference between working on or working in your business. And I think a lot of people, when they're first starting out, they spend so much of their time and energy working in the business, just filling all those stopgaps, that they never get a chance to really work on the business. And so the sooner that you can really hire great talent, put them into those places, it allows you the freedom and the time just to pull out and really focus on the macro vision.
Mhm.
Yeah, and also going bigger early, or having bigger systems than you need initially. I think, Dan, it sounded like you went into,
Yeah, kind of.
you didn't really, I don't know if you went with Appfolio or whatever out of the gate. You went with a system that was larger than your needs, but you
Yeah.
could grow into it rather than getting to 120 units and then trying to put that genie back in the bottle and fit it into a system. It is much easier. And these costs are not, we're not talking about tens of thousands of dollars for software management or software for property management. I hate hearing people say, "Oh, I'm not going to use a lawyer for $3,000 on a $4 million purchase because
That's a mistake.
Save a few bucks." I'm just like, oh, and this is kind of one of those smaller versions of the same concept. It's just build it into the expense of your business and
Yeah.
grow
And
with it.
the way I kind of looked at it as well is I use these types of things as motivating factors for growth, because if you start to hire staff, then all of a sudden you have a whole new incentive to go out there and continue to grow the business. Whereas if it's just you could take your sweet time, you can kick the can down the road and be like, oh, you know what, I don't feel like going out and deal hunting today. I'll do it next week. If you've got employees to support, then all of a sudden you are incentivized to a greater degree to not just go out and grow your portfolio for yourself, but to take care of those employees that you signed up to pay and provide benefits for. So it really increases the sense of urgency for growth. So I personally like to kind of get things a little bit before you think you would need them, or it
Before
makes
you're
financial
comfortable.
sense. Yeah, before I'm comfortable, because then it just forces me to go out and get to that next level that much sooner.
That's
Well,
great.
and Dan mentioned it earlier. We like to think about what's our end state, what's our outcome, and then working backwards from there. So you have to grow with the end in mind. And if your growth goal, if our goal is X number of units, and that's 10 times bigger than where we're currently at, then we need to be working to build systems that allow for that reality. Because what ends up happening is if you just are building the systems that work where you're currently at, those don't usually scale very well and they don't grow very quickly. And so they can be very good, for whatever size that you're at. If you're, say, at 30 or 40 units, that's great, but your growth is going to be stunted by that. Whereas if you're growing with that intentionality, or you're building those systems and saying, hey, we're going to be at 1,000 units in 2 years, or however long it's going to be, let's say, then you start putting those systems into place and the growth kind of happens as a consequence of that.
Yeah, because the CPA that is handling your 30 units, if you worked with the right one early and did your due diligence, will also be able to handle your 1,000 units. So same with your property management software, or your bookkeeper, or the long list of people that you want on your team. It sucks to have to go find something when you need it. It's much easier just to have it available.
Yeah, and some of these things are sticky too, like you mentioned, like the property management software Appfolio, making a decision like that, you get really kind of stuck in those ecosystems, I guess. And it's tough to shift. So you want to make sure that you do those types of shifts as infrequently as possible, because it's never easy to just export a bunch of data from one property management system, import it into the next one, and it's a process, right? So you want to try to make sure that whatever you're doing is going to keep working for a long time, so you don't have to keep going through those transitions.
Yeah, and to bring that down like all the way to the personal level, think about how much it sucks to move. Like if you go buy a new house and you want to move all your stuff over there, like it sucks. Nobody likes moving. Dan, you just went through a move. Did you enjoy it?
I just bought all new stuff.
You just burn the rest. You just let it burn down and walked away. Yeah, because moving's no fun, but it's like it's the same thing with your systems, with whether that's your property management or your CPA, like Greg's pointing out there. That's a great example. Like moving that stuff is not fun. It's not easy. And the fewer times that you can do that, if you can just find the right horse from the beginning to ride all the way to the end state, then that's great.
That's a great analogy.
Let's go back to what you talked about a little bit, Anthony. I think you're touching on asset management versus property management a little bit when you're both kind of talking about it. Just because you're self-managing doesn't mean that you're doing the walkthroughs or the showings. May trickle down to you occasionally. I mean, you guys are managing in the same markets that you're living and investing in. If you live in Tennessee and you're investing in Kansas, I'm not going to be doing that showing. But if you're already working with your third-party manager the way you should be as an owner, you're being an asset manager. You're looking at those Monday morning reports. You're getting ahead of them. So you'd be like, hey, we got these renewals. Here's how I think we should handle them. Things like that. And I think some people they're like, well, how am I going to afford payroll? How am I going to afford a maintenance guy? And what I think is sometimes hidden in that, 9 or 10% is you're already paying that payroll. That is being trickled down to you either directly as a pass through, or it's just bundled into that percentage. And if they're charging you 9%, their margin, their profit might be 3% of that. That 6% of that is going to overhead and payroll or anything. So I just think that some of those costs that people are worried about incurring, they need to realize that they're already incurring them and will probably achieve a savings because you're not going to have a fleet of vehicles burning gas and hanging out at Chili's for an hour and a half or whatever's going on. You're not going to have an office that you're leasing, things like that.
Yeah, one of the things I think with property management, if you're going to bring it in-house, to like if you can shift your mindset here, is that you are now a manager, like, of people, not so much the property. Like ideally you're going to put people in that place, and you have to be really honest with yourself. Are you a good manager of people? Do you want to manage people? Because what happens, I think, in a lot of jobs and like the corporate track, when you really excel at a thing, you could be the best coder in the world, and then you get a promotion, they promote you to manager, and you're like, well, I'm really good at coding, now I'm managing people. And if you've ever been in that position, you're probably like, I either really suck at this, or I'm not very good at this, or I don't like this. Like, and so if that's you, if you don't like managing people, then bringing it in-house is only going to exacerbate that, because that's really what you're doing, is managing those people that are then executing the goal.
Yeah, you're essentially replacing, like, let's say you're managing your own properties right now. You're replacing the tenant problems with interpersonal problems of staff and or tenants. So you're just having new problems. So either way, you're gonna have to deal with something. So it's important to, like Anthony said, be self-aware to hopefully you've had some kind of experience where you've had to manage people, so you kind of understand that dynamic of dealing with people. It's a lot less black and white than dealing with projects on a property. Dealing with people and their emotions and their personality conflicts is a pain in the butt. But I will say, as far as the expense that you mentioned, Greg, people might be turned off by saying, oh, I can't afford to bring someone on and pay them a salary. You're right, it is already on your P&L in the expenses somewhere. So you're just shifting the dollars from going to X, Y, and Z company to your payroll. But also people need to realize that, let's say you're going to potentially hire a property manager and it's your first hire and you're really intimidated and you're going to post a job and you're like, man, I've got to pay, $40 grand for this person a year. That's a lot of money, or whatever it is. Just realize that it's not like you're paying them that all at once, right? You hire them, they work a few weeks, you give them a paycheck. So your initial cost is just, paying them bi-weekly. So there's not a whole lot of money going out the door. You could try them for a few weeks, and if they suck, you could fire them, and then you're only out, $1,500 or whatever. So it's not like it's not quite as binary as I think a lot of people think it is, where they see that, oh, someone costs 40 grand a year. That means if I hire this person, I'm signing up to give them 40 grand a year. Like, you can them, you can have them, you can hire them on a probationary period and say, hey, we're going to try you out for 90 days. If I don't like you for any reason, after 90 days, we're done. You're not necessarily signing up to pay this person long-term if it's a bad fit. So your downside, if you get into it and you realize after 2 weeks that they're not a good fit, maybe you're out $1,500, right? That's not that big of a downside risk. So
yeah, what you're talking about there, Dan, is interesting. It's like the frequency of data tracking. If you track data on an annual basis, then yes, it's $40,000. But it doesn't play out like that. It's actually, you need to be tracking your data or your frequency on a biweekly or monthly basis, and then suddenly it's what, $5,000 a month. You're like, oh, that's much more manageable.
Yeah. And to Greg's point, it's already going somewhere, so you could just shift it from Anthony V Property Management and Co. to, your in-house payroll. It's just same money's going somewhere.
Hey, it's Greg from Real Wealth Solutions. If you'd like to know more about our passive income opportunities, jump onto realwealth.solutions and hit that schedule a call button. We're always happy to talk about our multifamily and flip projects and to answer any questions you may have. Again, that's realwealth.solutions. We look forward to hearing from you. And now, back to the podcast. Yeah. It's a lot of it is the reactive versus proactive. That's where third-party management tends to be more on the reactive side, because they have to be. They've got multiple owners, they got maybe thousands of doors, and a lot of times they're just chasing emergencies. If you bring in, and you've got couple hundred units, you're at some scale where you got individual people dedicated to individual properties or small groups of properties, it's a lot more easier to be proactive because somebody else's emergency isn't taking them away from your whatever you got going on.
And there's an alignment of interest there as well, because depending on the type of situation you've got with a third-party property manager, they might be showing one of your units to a prospective tenant, and then the tenant says something like, oh, I really wish this was here. Oh, it happens to be that I actually manage this other property that's owned by a different group over here that has that thing, and all of a sudden they've taken your lead to another property. So that kind of risk always exists out there as well.
At the end of the day, it's the principal agent problem. That's really what this all boils down to. So Charlie Munger, who's Warren Buffett's partner for many, many years now, he says, if you can be working as an owner on the principal agent problem, then don't work on anything else, because it's the most important one. So what is that? The principal is you, the owner, right? And the agent is the person who's acting on your behalf to execute the business plan. But the problem is that there's always a disconnect between you as the principal and the agent, because you own the thing. So you care about the outcome much more than the agent does. So how do you incentivize them to care as much as you do as the principal? Well, it's impossible. You can't make somebody care as much as the owner, but you can try and get them closer. The issue with third-party management is that fundamentally you have a very difficult time ever getting that agent in alignment with you, the principal. When you bring it in-house and you have a small crew of people that you can train on systems and processes, and you can build a culture around that, it's much easier to get them bought into your goal as the owner. You can instill that owner mentality much easier. So it's still a very high hurdle to get over. But one of the things for me with third-party management is that you can never really solve that issue in a nice, clean, easy way like you can when you bring it in-house.
Yep. Yeah. And, let's talk about like a very bottom line type thing, just on the numbers side of it. And I know this from our own analysis. I've looked at deals where I plugged in the expensive property management that we're used to, and then plugged in what we may be able to do by bringing it in-house, and very marginal deals look a whole lot better, because there's a very significant potential financial savings for being fully integrated. And talk about that, because you actually have experience with that. This is all just on a spreadsheet for me so far.
Yeah, that's actually one of the biggest pieces right there as well that we didn't even mention, was that what since these properties that we're talking about are valued based on the NOI, and a small change in NOI, your net income translates into a large difference in valuation. If you could save a little bit on your property management, it translates heavily into the value. And I would gladly, as the property manager, lose money on my property management business to have our properties performing well. And what I found with the management company that I was working with was the effective rate, even though they said it was 7 or 8%, I can't remember what it was initially, but when you factor in the expense of leasing things up, because most property managers are going to have some kind of fee or something when they lease a unit up. And there's going to be other little fees that work their way in there. And the effective rate usually ends up being more like 11 or even 12%, depending on the size of property and what your deal is with your property management company. But, they might say, hey, we charge 7% of gross or 8% of gross. When it's all said and done with, your effective rate is going to be a decent amount higher. So one of the best parts of having it in-house is we get to bring that down to wholesale costs. So our effective property management expense line item comes out being, sub 5%. And that keeps ticking up as we throw more units into the mix. So when it's at its peak efficiency, it's going to be more like 3 to 4%. When we first started it, it was up near 10 or 11%, because like I said, we started it in-house before it made financial sense, knowing full well that as we scaled, it would become more and more efficient. But we're able to look at deals. And since we've got property management in-house and we've got an in-house maintenance guy that we could use to help bring our cost of renovations down, even though we still have to outsource some of that to third-party vendors, he brings our average cost down. So we can look at deals and know that, hey, we could put $5,000 in per unit on this deal where most guys are going to have to spend $7,000 or $8,000 on CapEx items. And instead of paying, 10, 11% for property management, we're getting it for sub 5, right? The same deal will look a heck of a lot better to us than it will to someone else with all third-party vendors in there. So it just gives us that extra competitive advantage where our cost to do these projects is lower, and it's going to keep getting lower as we scale and as our systems become more efficient.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would add to that. That's awesome, by the way. I love all that. The other big one is time, which is incredibly difficult to factor into any kind of a projection or anything. But just days vacant, things like that, being able to control the clock is so important, especially over a long hold. You don't. If you look at it, you're losing whatever, $26 a day. Like you, Anthony, okay, let's annualize that. It doesn't seem like much when you say $26 a day. Let's annualize that. Now let's annualize that over 1,000 units potentially and see what you're leaving on the table. So time is one of those things, man. If you can get that down substantially, that's been one of my biggest complaints, is not being able to control the clock as much as I'd like to. But and I don't want to sound like we're totally bagging on third-party management. For a lot of people, it works really well.
Right. Hey, Dan,
a whole lot of people are very happy with it. To go do whatever they want to do. And
the in-house crowd is definitely the minority, and the vast majority of people do it with third party and make great money doing it. So
and because let's not lose sight of the fact that if you are going the third party route, you can probably scale a whole lot quicker than you could if you're doing it in-house. This is something that shouldn't be underestimated. If you are just relying on third party property teams, then you can go out and acquire 1,000 units overnight, and they're going to be hitting the ground running tomorrow, no problem. For us, if we go and do that, well, we're going to have some work ahead of us in terms of hiring out and building those systems. So
there's
going to be some job postings. Yeah. So we're going to be a little bit more limited in how quickly we can grow. So it just depends on what your personality is. And it keeps coming back to it again and again, is you have to know what your end state is and then work back from there.
Hey, Greg, I just want to make sure we're being conscious of time for Dan. I want to ask one, two quick questions.
Yeah.
You got 5 minutes?
Go for it.
Shoot.
Okay, so I love to talk about mindset. I want to know. I have a very specific question for Anthony, but for you, Dan, what is it that drives you each day? What's your why? Do you need something that motivates you? You self-motivated? Do you have a favorite motivational speaker, book, anything like that? What makes you do what you do every day?
Yeah, I think my why is definitely my family and building, um, not just financial wealth to provide them with a good life, but probably more importantly is building a machine that enables uh, me to have time freedom with my time. Right now, I don't mind grinding away and working a ton, but I want to create a situation where I can start to pick and choose how much time I spend working, and I can start to already kind of pull back on the reins. We've got a baby coming out in a couple weeks here, and I'm able to, just kind of take it way down a notch for a month or two, and that's fine. And I'm looking to just expand that farther now that we've got a baby coming, and just really create some really amazing systems that allow us to, take a step back, work on the business from a high level, but at the same time, free up a lot of time. So that's my main motivation is family. And then the secondary one is I just love to build things and then perfect them and try to keep getting better and better and better and better at certain projects I'm passionate about. So at this point, it's all about perfecting the machine and building something really great and just making it better and more efficient and bigger. So aside from money and time, it's just creating a really amazing thing.
Yeah, I like the term building the machine.
Yeah.
And you can just help that machine run more efficiently and keep it running when you're gone.
It's a very satisfying process trying to perfect a thing like that.
Mhm.
It's interesting that yesterday at church we talked about leaving your legacy. And a lot of people, when you talk about legacy, they think of it as a negative, like, oh, you were some big hot shot, Warren Buffett. You can be all that, but what is it specifically that people will remember you by? So that kind of, I think that might be the same thing. So Anthony, maybe along the same lines, but I want to know specifically if this writing for you, science fiction, fantasy, is that something you've always been interested in? Is it an outlet? Is it your creative side? Well, tell me more about that if you wouldn't mind.
So yeah, when I was a kid, I guess I had some like proclivity for writing that I didn't even know about. My dad recognized it in me pretty early on and was encouraging me to write, but it wasn't until I was maybe 25 or 26 that I really took up the pen and started writing seriously. And that occurred because a woman that a girl that I was getting engaged to, I went and asked her parents, "Hey, can I marry your daughter?" And they're like, "How are you going to provide for our daughter?" And I was like, "Oh, that's a good question." So I went and I was like, "I'll become an author. That's what I'll do. That's respectable." And so I started writing books. And what I realized was I just love creating. And science fiction, fantasy, that's great. In recent years, I've migrated more and more towards writing nonfiction and writing about mindset and all the things I've learned there, and psychology, because I have a master's degree in that. And so just writing more from personal experiences. And so whether it's science fiction with lasers, or it's writing about mindset or health, wealth, or how to communicate effectively with people, like for me, just creating is when I'm the happiest. And so I think it's similar for Dan, that building the machine, like building a real estate engine, is super gratifying at the end of the day, because you're just fully immersed and you're bringing something into reality that wasn't there before. And for people that maybe don't think of them as being creative types, I think everybody's creative. It's just a matter of how do you express it. Find that thing and then really lean into it, because I think everybody's lives are much better and much happier when they have something that they've created. And I think this is why so many people find so much meaning in having children, is because a lot of people maybe haven't had, a lot of things that they've built in their life, but that's one thing they can point to and say, I created that, look at that. And that's super gratifying. But, you don't have to necessarily, I'm not saying, kids are bad or anything, but I'm saying you can also achieve like some pretty high levels of satisfaction by creating other types of things too. So I would encourage people to try and figure out what that is for them.
That's awesome. Do you
Yeah, that was great.
do you put your writings on maybe a blog post or something like that? Maybe on your guys' website or your personal website or something?
Yeah, so I write all over the place. I have a bunch of books out there, but I write on like mindset, health, wealth, and communication over at the hyperfocusedmind.com. So I used to be a big blogger on Medium and these other places, and that in like Inked and Forbes and all these places. And so that was a big part of my life for a long time. And with real estate now, I'm much more focused on this at the moment. So if you're interested in learning about real estate, then you can go over to our website, Invictus Multifamily. We have a pretty robust blog there. And then I'm working on a book called Passive Investing Made Simple, which should be published here in the next month or so. And that's all about how do you passively invest in multifamily properties, coming from a perspective like, I maybe just learned about what this is, take you all the way through the process so that you feel comfortable at the end to go out there and actually vet an operator, look at deals, and maybe start funding and getting involved in this really awesome investment vehicle.
Wow, man, that's awesome. Thank you. I guess that kind of leads us into how people can get a hold of you, which you just sort of threw some stuff out there. Dan, you have any separate contact information, emails, website, anything like that?
No, the crew's on by our website. You can contact us both through there. You can also find us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Just search for Invictus Capital and or Dan Krueger and Anthony Vicino, and we'll be popping up. Anthony's very active with his articles on LinkedIn as well. So definitely follow him there. He's killing the social media game as we speak.
I'm excited about picking that up as well as the hyperfocusedmind.com. I'm going to check that out for sure. Thank you for sharing that. Greg, I just wanted to get the father to be out of here. So I know we probably could have talked about property management another hour. I really appreciate you guys' insight. And we may probably hit you up separately off of here as well, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
About that.
Cool. Well, I'll take us out, man. Thank you all joining us here, Real Wealth Solutions podcast. Yeah. And really good conversation. I think people will get some value out of that here and from both sides of the table where people are actually actively operating on the property management side. There's good, there's bad, there's always trade-offs. I think Anthony has a great point of, spend some time thinking ahead of where you want to land and then figure out, maybe which path will probably, or what you'll end up being or needing to achieve that goal and maybe start there sooner is kind of what I got out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you know somebody that would enjoy our conversation with Anthony and Dan, please share it. And we always appreciate a like and subscribe. And that's it. We'll see you all on the next episode.
Thanks for having us, guys.
See you guys.